People could take their seats, we'll go ahead and begin. My name is Cole Durham. For those of you who don't know me, I'm the moderator of this panel. I think many of you are aware and you've noticed the incredible team doing the communications. These proceedings, yes. Audrey, maybe we could have you stand up. Audrey Kitagawa is the person who has really worked with us to arrange this from the International Academy of Multicultural Cooperation. International Academy of Multicultural Cooperation. I think I got that right. But we're very grateful. We're very grateful for them and the incredible work they're doing. We know that people around the hemisphere are listening in, and also the Religions for Peace group has arranged, they've got people who are taking notes remotely. If you don't see them in the room, there are people who are listening to the sessions online, and we will be gathering recommendations in that form, synthesizing them afterwards, and we'll talk more about that this afternoon. But I just wanted you to know that that's happening. But again, the multimedia team here has really been remarkable, and we're very grateful. With that, I think we can begin. I'm going to just sit down and as we introduce the group. So let me sit down. We have a very distinguished panel this morning, and I'm just going to introduce people briefly as they speak. First, we'll be hearing from Reverend Juan Antonio Cruz Serrano, who is the permanent observer of the Holy See to the Organization of American States, and we're very grateful to have you with us. The next speaker will be online, so I will introduce him following. The plan is for each of the speakers to take 10 or fewer minutes for an initial statement. There's timing in the back. You can see they'll give you a 5-minute and a 2-minute warning, and then the time. So without further ado, well, let me just say one other thing about this session. So the subject is the role of faith communities in peace building in the Americas. I want to stress that this is peace building broadly understood, as you will see as we go through the panel, because there are so many different dimensions to this. But I think religious communities feel a special commitment and concern about avoiding violence, finding ways to build peace, build relationships. One of the major things we do by bringing people from different groups together is to build solidarity. And so we think this is a really key session. So without further ado, let me turn things over to you. Excuse me? Oh, I'm sorry. Sorry. I'm the absent-minded one, and I'm constantly proving that to other people. But thank you very much. If we could all stand and just start with a moment of silence. Yep. Thank you.
Good morning to everyone, and thank you very much for this invitation to participate in this second Interreligious Forum of the Americas. Faith, leads the believer to see in the other a brother or a sister whom he must sustain and love. By faith in God, the believer is called to express this human fraternity. This sentence, this quote, is taken from the Declaration of Human Fraternity, signed by Pope Francis and the Grand Imam of Al-Azhar, Ahmad Al-Tayed, in Abu Dhabi on February 2019. This document was born in the light of fraternal dialogues full of hope and has been transformed into a common declaration with a view to inviting all people who carry in their hearts faith in God and faith in human fraternity to unite and work together to create a culture of mutual respect and solidarity. In this sense, I consider significant this second Interreligious Forum of the Americas. It is important to gather in an atmosphere of fraternity and friendship to reflect on the implication of our faith in society. Perhaps we cannot say that there is a war in our continent, here in America. We can say that perhaps it's not a war. Pope Francis said a few years ago that in our world society there are signs of what could be called a third world war in pieces. Signs that in various parts of the world and in different tragic conditions have begun to show their cruel face. We now see that there are other areas that have become the scene of new conflict, a new war. In 2007, the Fifth General Conference of the Latin American Episcopate held in Aparecida, Brazil, noted that social life is seriously deteriorating in many countries of this continent due to the growth of violence, which manifests itself in robberies, assault, kidnappings, organized crime and drug trafficking, and also growing domestic violence, without neglecting everything that implies the migration that affects so many countries of our hemisphere, as well as the threats of the rights of indigenous people in the Amazonia. In addition, we could see a supposed ideological war, also called culture war, which drives the idolatry of money, the advance of individualist and utilitarian ideology, disrespect for the dignity of each person, the deterioration principle of society, and the lack of public policies of social equity. Among the most important causes of this current crisis, it could see an anesthetized human consciousness and a departure from the religious values, in addition to the predominance of individualism and materialistic philosophies that deify man and put worldly and material values in the place of supreme and transcendent principles. Faced with the reality of our continent, every one of us we know, what will or should do the man and woman of faith? The Bible says that the peace is much more than the simple absence of war. It represents the fullness of life more than a human construction. It is the supreme divine gift offered to all men. So peace is lived day by day in the search of the order willed by God and can only flourish when each one recognizes his own responsibility to promote it. Therefore, peace is a gift from on high as the fruit of a shared commitment. To prevent conflict and violence, it is absolutely necessary that peace begin to be lived as a value within each person. In this way, it can be extended to families, to community of faith, and to various forms of social aggregation, until it reaches the entire political and international community. They have always been men and women of all faiths thirsting for a more perfect justice and have helped to understand this role of faith in service of peace. We can think about Martin Luther King, Desmond Tutu, Mahatma Mohandas Gandhi, San Francis of Assisi, San Charles de Foucault, Alberto Hurtado of Chile, Oscar Romero in El Salvador, and so many more examples. They express a desire to feel any human being as a brother and a sister in equal rights and freedom. So Pope Francis wrote an encyclical, Fratelli Tutti, published in 2020, dedicated one entire chapter to religions at the service of fraternity in the world. It's very important, this chapter, the role of religions at the service of fraternity in the world. In these pages, he reminds us that the different religions, starting from the valuation of each human person as a creature called to be a son or daughter of God, offer a valuable contribution to the construction of fraternity and to defense of justice in society. In a concrete way, how can faith collaborate in favor of peace? Also, I would like to quote another document of the Pope Francis. Every year he publishes a letter that is addressed to all the community, all the human community, that is about faith. It's the 1st of January of every year. And this year, the title that he made to this document is this: Dialogue between Generation, Education and Work, Instruments to Build a Lasting Peace. Dialogue between generation, education and work are the basis to build a peaceful society. And I conclude, peace is a precious but also a precarious good that we must take care of, educate and promote. Authentic transformation are forged in people's hearts. They are no structures if they are not new men and new women who mobilize and converge in the people's ideals and powerful moral and religious energies. We dream of a continent from Canada to Chile, embracing all the Caribbean countries, united, reconciled, and integrated. And in that dream, the faith brings its particularity. We belong to the same Father. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Father Cruz Serrano. I think you've really helped us start thinking about the range of issues that involve peace, in which religious institutions, religious beliefs can play a really significant contributing role. Now, our next speaker will be joining us online. This is Dr. Antonios Kyriopoulos, who is the Associate Secretary General for Faith and Order and Interfaith Relations of the National Council of Churches in the USA. I see that he's already online, and we're seeing your picture and your live shot, so we'll turn the time directly to you. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you. I appreciate it. First, I'd like to thank the organizers of this forum The National Council of Churches and I have worked alongside all of these organizations. And in particular, I'd point out that I was formerly on the staff of Religions for Peace and Religions for Peace USA. So I'm familiar with all of the fine work each of these organizations does. And I thank them for inviting me to join you in this conversation. Second, I'd like to thank Professor Cole Durham for his witness that he's given over the years to these and similar issues, and for moderating the session today. I'd also like to thank my co-panelists for their presentations and all those present in person and online participating in this discussion. Third, I'd also mention that I am going to try to step in today for my colleague, Bishop Vashti Murphy McKenzie, who is the new interim president and general secretary of the NCC. She could not be with us today as she has been on a pastoral visit to Uvalde, Texas, to help bring spiritual comfort to those closest to the recent tragedy, as she was in Buffalo, New York, in the aftermath of that tragedy, and today is at a related rally against gun violence. She nonetheless sends her best wishes to the forum's participants. The shootings in Uvalde and Buffalo bring us to the themes of this forum, and particularly the themes of this plenary and the concurrent sessions to follow. Where to begin to articulate the many challenges we face in each of our contexts and globally. In my own context, and the context of many of you there, the United States, we have mass shootings almost on a daily basis. We have the ongoing struggles wrought by racism, most visible in the racism directed against the Black community, but also that which is directed against the Hispanic community and the countless immigrants at our southern border, at the Asian communities in California and across the country, as demonstrated by the repeated incidents of anti-Asian hate crimes, at the Jewish community with rising anti-Semitism in the US, and at the Muslim community and those perceived to be Muslim, including the Sikh community, with persistent Islamophobia throughout the country. In what is not an exhaustive list, in Canada, there is the unresolved pain in the Indigenous community arising from the heartbreaking discoveries at many residential schools. In the Caribbean, there is poverty and inequity stemming from unaddressed historical and present-day injustices. In Mexico and Central America, there are dangers posed by the drug trade and gang violence. In South America, there is the suffering wrought by political corruption and environmental degradation. In other contexts, among the many situations, we cannot forget the war in Ukraine, the occupation in Israel and Palestine, the killing of Christians just the other day in Nigeria, the persecution of religious minorities in India, the incarceration and re-education camps of the Uyghurs in China, and the treatment of the Rohingya in Myanmar. War, persecution, and inequity, hate crimes, discrimination, and global warming, oppression, violence, and the absence of peace. They all beg for solution. They all produce victims who shout out for justice, and they all reflect a grieving and ailing world in need of healing. Yes, there are political solutions to each of these situations, but they all place a call upon religious communities to do our part to foster peace. Our role is to nurture the environment whereby the political and civil initiatives toward peace can take root. It is to partner with all people and groups of goodwill to offer humanitarian aid in the face of threatening and destabilizing realities. It is to provide a grounding and a haven for those agitating for justice. It is to advocate for just policies. It is to offer hope and material sustenance when the most vulnerable reach out for help. All of these things contribute to peace. When I first came to the NCC now 19 years ago, after Religions for Peace USA, my portfolio was in fact called International Affairs and Peace. Several years later, I switched to intra-Christian theological dialogue called Faith and Order, and interreligious relations and collaboration. If there's one thing I've learned in my many years of doing the latter, it is that all religious traditions have common values and shared commitments when it comes to working for peace. How we translate these imperatives into action is determined by our respective communities and is dictated by the circumstances in which our communities find themselves. My own organization, the NCC in the USA, for its part, has prioritized addressing racism in its many forms, though it does not neglect other areas of injustice. But as we consider how we go about this work, I would cite the words of a colleague who spoke to those gathered for a meeting a few weeks ago at the Council on Foreign Relations, who reminded us that, quote, "Our task is to divine when we should respond with a stinging word of prophetic rebuke and when we should respond with a soothing word of pastoral comfort, and that the currency in which religious leaders deal is neither military might nor economic power, but rather moral suasion and spiritual guidance." He also reminded us that as we go about this work, quote, "We seek transformation of our own lives, of our nations, and of our world. We seek to make the world more truthful, more beautiful, more peaceful, and more just. We seek to expand the domain of human dignity." These words spoken by my colleague point to what we're all about, and this is why I wanted to share them with you today. But they are more than lofty sentiments. They reveal the foundation upon which we build the kind of peace we seek and the kind of peace our societies need. Gracias a todos. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much. I think you've brought to mind, certainly for those of us from the United States, the sort of the current crisis of gun violence and so forth that we're experiencing, which we can take, I suppose, as a tragic symbol of the ongoing ways that we have lack of peace. And I think your effort to try and direct us not only to think about the lofty sentiments, but also how we translate those into reality is very much something that we're hoping to do here. So thank you very much for joining with us and conveying those words. Let me next turn to Melody Amal Khalil Kabalan, President of the Islam Institute for Peace and a member of Religions for Peace Latin America and Caribbean Youth Network. Thank you very much.
Working right? Yes.
In the name of God, the merciful, peace be with the Prophet Muhammad and all the prophets that came before him. May peace and blessings be with all of you. I would like, I'm sure that this is a very common greeting among all our religions present here. First of all, I would like to thank our moderator, Mr. Durham, and all the organizers that have allowed us to be here in this summit, that have allowed all our faith groups, because many times we've heard in the media, many times when religions are blamed for the tragedies that occur around the world. And one of the focus or a focus in this summit is resilience and an equitable focus. And we know the importance for mankind, the importance that faith has for mankind as well as religions. I also want to thank Elias and Paula because undoubtedly they are the ones who always guarantee that the youth are engaged in Latin America. And this is a big problem that we have, to engage the youth in faith communities and in dialogue, interreligious dialogue tables. So my sincere thanks. And this is also a reminder that we have a big task ahead, so that the youth all around the world can engage or participate in the same table, discussion table with adults. I was also thinking yesterday and today about the people who have participated in our gatherings, and what this type of space and interreligious dialogue brings about. We become friends, we forge friendships, and we start putting an end to, some prejudices or biases towards those that maybe pray differently. And so these gatherings bring us closer together to live in this intercultural and diverse religious world. I don't know when I started, and I know that there's a timer because I like to speak. So continuing with this, with the topic of this panel, which is the role of communities of faith in the construction of peace in the Americas.
And so I was wondering, what is our responsibility for those that are in charge of a religious institution or the religious leaders? That is, how can we guarantee that our communities can have an equal participation? Because before we started with the interreligious dialogue is the intra-religious dialogue, which is among our communities. So if we all can really guarantee that in a near future, the participation, and I mean the participation of women, that thanks God we are seeing it, but is very recent. And honestly, I deeply admire all the women that are leaders and they are sharing dialogue tables, because it's not a thing of being women versus men or men versus women or just round tables for men, and it is also a good thing to have segregated tables, so to speak, but to work jointly is what is really going to make us stronger in building peace, when we really understand what are the needs that we have, men, women, and the youth. That is something that we need to keep working on. So to these questions that I am asking myself, I can talk to you from my experience as an Argentinian, as a young woman, as a Muslim woman in construction of peace. I know that we have a lot of similarities, and I am proud of that in terms of the values of religion. In today's topic, I remembered the participation of women, and I also remembered about a story of Muslim tradition. 5? Okay. So a story of Muslim tradition, and that is when a great companion, Salama, was asking the prophet of God, the messenger of God, where did we talk about women? These type of questions that afterwards that day the prophet is actually sharing a part of the Quran where God is talking about the responsibility of men and women, that they could be compassionate, that those that are fasting, those that are in charge of peace. These gives us an indication that when we're talking at a round table about construction of peace, and we talk about women's role and leadership, we are really exercising the values of our religion. And no, it's not that we are having or challenging anything, but the thing is that for many years we as women did not have the possibility to have access to these scriptures or to these teachings. So why am I talking about this? Well, because from the experience of the Muslim Institute for Peace, we formed just recently last year an executive team, and we have 3 mottos. One that we already had, and basically that is the Department of education, and that is because the first instruction that prophet receives from Gabriel is read in the name of your Lord. That is an invitation to read, to get educated, to learn. So we formed two new departments. One is for interreligious dialogue, and that is because we know that our religion is teaching about peace, love, and respecting others. And also another department, which is a gender department. And of course, on top of serving so that we can reach people that don't know about Islamism, and they can realize that a lot of things that is being said is not true. Above all, what we're really trying to do is to educate men and women about the role that women has in religion. And so that's precisely according to what I said, that for very long that was left aside. So why do I think, or why do we think that this is a way to build peace? Well, because we need to live with equity. We need to find and listen to the needs that our communities have, from senior citizens, the youth, when men, women, and also there is something that we're not been talking about when we talk about building peace, and that is children. What is the role that they have in our community? And also, we cannot leave them aside in that education and in that dialogue for peace. Why? Because sometimes we are waiting until maybe we turn 30 or we start the university so that then we can start getting involved in this dialogue. But why do we have to wait so much? Why don't we wait since we are since our childhood, that would incentivize that dialogue with other people? It is proved that as the more we interact with religion, we actually reinforce our own faith, because then we can be incentivized to learn more. And lastly, because I know I'm running out of time, when we talk about the communities, thanks to God, this year in our institute, just a week ago, we managed to sign an agreement with a national institution from the government, and this is called INADI, which is the National Institute Against Discrimination, Xenophobia, and Racism, so that we can work about creating awareness of this topic in terms of Islamophobia, and also to train everybody about this Muslim culture. And this can be possible whenever we're working from religious communities with a government agency. And I will finish by saying that we did the same when the pandemic started. We had a program of the University Network for Youth, and within the Department of Human Rights from the legislature, we managed to have a meeting. We managed to join youth, young people, young Muslims, also Catholics and Jews that had never met each other, and they had the same subjects in the university. They were listening to the same music. They would go dancing to the same place, or they would go have lunch to the same place as well, or they had some similarities in political terms about the country. And so that's when we realized, right, that we have that opportunity to have that dialogue around the corner in the same neighborhood, even because some of them were neighbors and they didn't know. And so they can take that advantage of that possibility of seeing how similar they are, how sensitive they could get whenever they could understand the pain or the point of view from another person on a specific topic. And that was thanks to this encounter. So just to finish, just finally, I consider that it is of utmost importance that for construction of our communities of faith towards peace, we really take into account the same conditions and the same participation from the members of our community first, so that then we can work outwards. Thank you so much, and God bless you.
Well, thanks very much, Melody, for sharing those ideas and representing both women and youth. And I can only emphasize and tell you from having worked behind the scenes of the intensity with which we have worked on trying to bring both types of voices into the discussions here. And as many of you, particularly the women, would know, This is not always easy in these, in the religious circles, particularly because of tradition, history, and so forth. But I think we're all learning something that we've always known, that, first of all, the children are the future, and that, well, women are the present. They're the ones that get so much done. So thank you for your words. We'll now turn to Michael Collins, who is the Executive Director for the Americas Institute for Economics and Peace. We look forward to your presentation.
Good morning. I'd like to show you 3 images today. This is the first. It's a sculpture made by a guy called Carl Frederick Rutersward. It's called the Knotted Gun. It's he originally developed it, or he sort of made it as a memorial to John Lennon. He was one of John Lennon's friends, and when John Lennon was shot in New York, he made this sculpture. But it's progressively been adopted as kind of an international symbol of peace. Some of you may have seen it. It's actually based outside of the United Nations Secretariat in New York, and it's progressively popped up in front of a number of institutions around the world. It's actually a lot smaller than it appears here in the image. And the reason that I chose it is because I think that it really is a really good visualization of peace. The guns are silent, right? No more bullets can be shot. Now, this absence of violence or fear of violence is often called negative peace. It's a peace that's measured by the absence of something. But peace can and should be interpreted much more broadly, as Venerable Professor Cole mentioned in his opening comments. So if we look at this picture, again, we can ask ourselves, what is needed to tie this knot? Now, if you'll allow me to sort of stay literal for a moment, what would we need? Well, we'd need, I'm assuming, an intense source of heat, which would need fuel. We'd need a table and a big vise, and we need a strong enough tool to physically bend the barrel. We'd probably need a whole group of friends to help us out as well. Now, in conjunction, this is representative of the broader attitudes, institutions, and structures that create and sustain peaceful societies. Now, creating these underlying elements, creating these conditions, creating these tools is just as important as the end result that you see here. Without them, there's no peace. Now, furthermore, when you've developed those tools, you can use them for a whole lot of other things too. So the Institute for Economics and Peace, the organization that I work with, we've been measuring negative and positive peace for the last 15 years. You could please, oh, I think that's me. Now, we use statistical analysis to determine which are the main qualities of the world's most peaceful nations. These are, as you can see here, and hopefully you can read them, a well-functioning government, an equitable distribution of resources, free flow of information, good relations with neighbors, high levels of human capital, acceptance of the rights of others, low levels of corruption, and a sound business environment. Now, while you look at these pillars, take a moment to think about your faith-based work. Now, I'd like to ask you to please lift your hand if you think that your faith-based work positively impacts one or more of these pillars in front of you. So for those of you joining on Zoom, pretty much the entirety of the room raised their hands. And thank you. It is well known, for example, that religious institutions provide up to half of the world's education and healthcare, critical pillars of positive peace. And during the 2-year partnership that we've had with Religions for Peace, I've seen a myriad of food security, agricultural literacy, forestry, reconciliation projects, all of which contribute directly and tangibly to improving measures of positive peace. So I contend that it's not so much learning about how to build peace, but recognizing that you already are. Now, there are steps that can be taken, of course. So our research, for example, has shown that the communities that most sustainably improve in peacefulness do so by making small improvements to all pillars simultaneously. Now, the common bond shared by faith-based organizations, for example, allows for the kind of multi-religious collaboration and projects that can span all of these pillars in ways that wouldn't be possible by one faith alone. Number two, the convening power and the safe spaces created by faith-based organizations allows for very productive discussions between actors hailing from all pillars of positive peace and all parts of society. Again, creating the connections that are so necessary for sustaining peace over time. So third, positive peace moves slowly, but it starts moving quicker the more it is built. Now, the patience and the lifetime commitment of faith-based organizations and multi-faith organizations that surpass the life of any, even the most healthy, political administrations means that they, you, are uniquely positioned to build positive peace. Now, simple acts like inviting your community to rank and to discuss progress in each of these pillars, for example, can help identify community needs and strengths and partnerships and people that were previously undiscovered, that will greatly reinforce the impact of your existing peace-building work. So I had the delight of working with the Religions for Peace Interreligious Council of Colombia last year, looking at community needs through the lens of positive peace, so to speak. In a short time, we're able to unearth a number of threads and strings that are going to be invaluable to their future peace-building work. So in closing, we'd like to submit to you this tool, the Pillars of Positive Peace, for toiling the land, for lighting the candle, for binding the book, for creating space where space needs to be created, and for bringing us together when we're apart. Thank you very much for your service, and we very much look forward to supporting your very important work in the years to come.
So thank you very much for those very important words about building not only peace, but the infrastructure of peace, and reminding us, as we need to remind others, that we are critical players in building that infrastructure. And I also liked your reference to convening power. As someone who's worked on convening this meeting, what I could tell you about convening power is it depends on people being willing to be convened. But recognizing the importance that groups like this can play, and that's one of the reasons we really have this deep sense that we should take advantage of this opportunity, what Catherine Marshall yesterday spoke of as the Kairos moment, to move forward and find ways to work together. Now, at this point, I'd like to turn to Brian Grimm, the president of the Religion and Business Foundation. Brian has been a long-term friend and has been remarkably creative at thinking about ways that religion works on these kinds of issues in very practical ways in the private sector. So he will, I'm sure, add a different dimension, and we're very grateful that he was able to come and join us today. So, Brian.
Yeah, thank you, Cole, and good morning, everybody. Good to be with you. I'd like to thank Cole, the organizers, for putting this panel together. Thank you, fellow panelists, and I'm looking forward to one more after my comments. So, actually, the name of my foundation is the Religious Freedom and Business Foundation, and it was started more than 8 years ago. And when we first started it, I was working with the United Nations Global Compact on some different data projects. I used to be at the Pew Research Center. And former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon set up a branch within the UN Global Compact, which is the big business organization at the UN, called Business for Peace. And as they started deliberations about, well, how can business help us with peace, they realized that religion was both part of the solution to problems of peace, but also part of the problem, because sometimes religion adds fuel to the fire when people stir up religious sentiments, and that makes conflicts even worse. So they didn't really have anybody at the Global Compact that knew about religion, so they asked me to come on board and help them with that. And one of the first initiatives we did was, came out of meeting with the former vice president who became the president of Brazil, Michel Temer, who ended up not being so popular at the end. But one of the things that we had when we had our first meeting with him was at Pew, I measured religious freedom and the violations, the restrictions on religious freedom, just like positive peace. So you look at peace in a different way. I looked at religious freedom of who's doing it well. And Brazil was #1 in the world by Pew's measures, among the largest, most populous countries. And I told Michel Temer that. We sat around his table with his aides, and he shot back in his chair and said, I didn't know that. And he looked at his military aide, did you know that? And he asked the next guy, did you know that? He said, I'm a constitutional lawyer. I should have known that. And so he asked, what can I do? And I said, well, one, could we start having awards every 2 years in conjunction with the Paralympic Games, starting in Brazil, recognizing business leaders advancing interfaith understanding and peace around the world? And he said, well, sure. And then he went around the country and wrote some articles and went around and started talking about it. So he got the connection right away. So let me just talk about what the connection is. And when you think about business, you think about, I work with some big companies like Google and Facebook and American Airlines and American Express and Texas Instruments and companies you've probably heard about. And you think of all the, Google, you Google things. Well, if you think about it in a different way, flip your paradigm around and realize, what is a company made up of? People. And who are people? Well, at Pew, we estimated almost 9 out of 10 people have a faith. So these big companies are filled with people. So that's really what the power of, I'd like you to think about, when you think of what religion could do, think about the power of religious professionals. And what can they do to move the needle on issues like human trafficking, on issues like violations against religious freedom, on issues like war and peace. And they can actually do a lot, because when people are inspired by their faith, they can change the world. Mahatma Gandhi said, you can shake the world with, I lost the quote, you can shake the world, in a gentle way you can shake the world, that's what he said. And that's what faith does. We have the love and compassion. For me, I'm Catholic, and that gives my faith is the center of my peace. My faith is the center of everything that motivates me, as I'm sure yours is as well. And so you have people like that with passion for their faith in all of these big companies. So let me give you just a few examples. Last month, we had our annual Dare to Overcome conference hosted at the Catholic University of America. For those of you who are Notre Dame fans, I don't know if any are, but the Catholic University in Washington, D.C. is the Pontifical Catholic University of the U.S. It's the official university of the Catholic Church in the United States. At the Catholic University, we hosted 300 people from these big companies, Google and Amazon and Meta, which is Facebook, and Dell Technologies. And they all came and shared what they're doing as people of faith in their companies to not only make their businesses faith-friendly, but what their businesses can do. We also invited these Global Business Interfaith Peace Award winners to come together. And I'll just tell you a few of their stories. First, on the people power, let's just think of not the ordinary worker, which is more powerful than the CEO, but because there's more of them. You can do so much more with 100,000 people than you can do with one woman or man. But let's think of a CEO. CEO Judith Richter, she's the CEO of Israel's Metanol heart stent company, and they make heart stents, and they just send a huge shipment to Ukraine of, to try to save lives in this ongoing war with Russia. Well, she realized that her business is to heal people's hearts. And she said, I have to do that in the Holy Lands. So every summer for the past 23 years, she's had the School of the Heart. She brings people from all the different faiths, Muslims, Christians, Jews, Druze, and others in Palestine, Jordan, and Israel together to study cardiovascular business, but it's to connect their hearts. And so she gave the most passionate speech about what you can do as an individual business person to bring peace, and it was beautiful. Her parents were Holocaust survivors, but her grandparents didn't survive the Holocaust. Judith Richter. The other is we do an annual index measuring this faith friendliness in companies, allowing people to express their faith and belief at work. And so we gave these awards out. One of the top awards, I'll talk about three, just in 3 minutes. Intel, they were our #1 company 2 years ago, or last year. Every year, they have a Martin Luther King Day celebration. The Christian Employee Resource Group, it's called the Bible-Believing Christians at Intel, partners with the Race Group to have annual readings of Martin Luther King speeches, which are basically sermons, right? Speeches, and they get people around all the flagpoles of Intel facilities across the world to focus on Martin Luther King's words. Just an example of bringing that people of faith, and they bring in all the faiths and all the different people together around that one day and around the messages of Martin Luther King. Second, American Airlines. They have something called Abraham's Tent. They have these employee resource groups. They have a Jewish one, Muslim one, and a Christian one, and they have others, but they have a partnership called Abraham's Tent. And then they talk about issues common to the different faiths each month. And the employees of American Airlines vote on what the topic should be. Last year, they voted on what does your faith say about racial equality. And that was just in January, and then George Floyd was murdered later that spring. And right the week after George Floyd's murder, they had that event, the biggest event they've ever had to talk about that. So they opened their door right when conflicts are brewing. By opening the door to faith, people spoke into that and didn't try to cover it up. And they talked about how faith can address. And the last is Dell Technologies. 2 years ago, their interfaith employee resource groups, which has thousands of members around the world, went to their HR and said, can we do a global campaign to raise awareness to combat human trafficking? And it was the first time, all this diversity, you hear about it, you usually think of it's women or race and LGBT and maybe some other categories, well, abilities, and then veterans and, many categories. So Dell has 13 categories, and never before had they all worked together on a project. But the faith people from their faith said, these people are, that are being trafficked are made in the image of God. These are God's children. These are our brothers and sisters. We need to do something. And every other group in Dell, every other diversity group, from LGBT to veterans to abilities to women to race and many others, followed the faith lead. 38 countries where Dell Technologies worked had these massive campaigns. And at our conference at Catholic University, and I'll conclude with this, Dell shared their experience and said, other companies, why don't you join us? And let's do this, not just us. What would happen if all of us worked together? American Airlines jumped up and they said, well, we're training our flight crews to recognize if there's an old man with a young person who's looking pretty nervous, that we better have authorities to meet them when they get off the airplane. Dell said we're using facial technology to scan porn sites to see if somebody is on there who's been trafficked. And then other companies said, we can do things too. Where did that come from? Not the CEOs, but the people power, people of faith in their companies. So the word I'll just leave you with is, as you think about religion, don't just think about what religious leaders can do, But how can religious leaders tap into the people power of faith in every workplace across our world? It's exciting, and there's a lot of potential there. So again, thank you, Cole. Thank you, everyone, for this wonderful conference.
So thanks to Brian, and let me expand my apology for leaving out the word religious freedom in business. Many of you would know that I often characterize Brian as the author of the Grimm statistics, because I first met Brian when he was doing the Pew Research statistics on restrictions on religion worldwide and so forth. And I remember having him come to a conference and then he was just so actively thinking about and I want to highlight this because it's, I think, something we should all be doing. How do you think outside the box, if you will, about how to really contribute to peace, to contribute to religious freedom, to contribute to other things? And I think one of the things that Brian saw is that the business sector is tremendously significant. There are religious believers in the religious sector who bring their convictions to the workplace, and that can be tapped in incredibly powerful ways. So go to Brian's site and see some of the other kinds of things they've been doing. But it's also an invitation to all of us, I think, to think broadly about peace building. So next we're going to hear from Melissa Nozelle, the Program Officer for Religion and Inclusive Societies, United States Institute for Peace. So Melissa.
Can you hear me okay? Yeah. Okay. Good morning. It's a pleasure and an honor to be with you all today. Thank you, Cole. Thank you, fellow panelists, and thank you all here in the audience and those of you who are joining online. I'll stick to my script this morning, I think, for the sake of time, so bear with me. I'm here from the U.S. Institute of Peace. We're a quasi-governmental U.S. organization based in Washington, D.C., with an international mandate. Our mission is to prevent, manage, and resolve violent conflict through nonviolent means. For over 30 years, USIP has been looking at how religion drives violence and builds peace. Recognizing the influence of religion on state institutions and policies, social norms, and intergroup relations, we provide research to map and analyze religious dynamics and landscapes in conflict zones, promote effective strategies for religious engagement in peace-building practice and policy, and convene communities of practice connecting experts and practitioners across the globe. The field of religious peace-building is rich with lessons from many contexts globally. I speak today with a caveat. I'm not an expert in the Americas myself. My work is cross-contextual. Yet the role of faith leaders and communities in peace-building in the Americas has been well documented at all levels of action. Today, I will share some observations from our research and work at USIP, highlighting examples that are pertinent to Latin American contexts. There are three areas I will highlight. One, religious actors' roles in providing psychosocial support to address trauma. Two, the unique contributions of religious women and religious youth to peace building. And three, the formal and informal roles of religious actors leading peace efforts both from the grassroots and from the top. In order for sustainable peace to be possible, trauma must be addressed. Religion, religious actors, and religious dimensions like ritual and community can and do play particularly significant roles in addressing mental health and psychosocial needs of survivors of violence, including refugees and IDPs. We see this in the Colombian and Venezuelan contexts through USIP's pilot initiative on religion and psychosocial support, which my colleague Andreas leads. Some of you may have joined us yesterday for a workshop that dove further into some of the issues of our initiative. We know, and many of you know firsthand from experience, that religious actors are often on the front lines responding to mental health needs. Institutions tend to have broader access to territories and populations, often where service providers cannot operate. They're often able to work locally while they also have the credibility and trust fostered by their religious ties and affiliations. In a time when there are an extraordinary number of trauma-impacted migrants and displaced people worldwide, and when locally available mental health professionals are overburdened or can't enter areas where they are needed the most or are not equipped with the religious literacy with which to effectively engage, strengthening the capacity of religious actors and mental health and psychosocial support professionals in this field will enhance trauma support. Religious women and youth offer particularly important and unique contributions to peace-building efforts. An inclusive understanding of who we mean when we talk about religious actors is imperative, and I suspect most of us in this room understand that. But let me delve into that a little bit further. My colleague Palwasha Kakar has observed that across contexts, religious women are often able to effectively negotiate and mediate in conflict scenarios because they are women of faith, using religious language, commanding respect that they have as religious women in the community, even when they haven't necessarily been trained technically as negotiators or mediators and wouldn't necessarily themselves even identify as such. My colleagues and a team of local researchers are helping to document stories of these remarkable women in countries including Syria, Pakistan, Kenya, and Colombia. Among the reasons for their success that has been observed through this research is the ability to build networks and coalitions of women of faith. For example, HEMPAS, a group of ecumenical women in Colombia that USIP has supported and collaborated with, uses an interfaith approach to dialogue and reconciliation, engaging, supporting, and amplifying women from across traditions to address issues facing their communities. Representation matters. We know that peace processes are more likely to be successful when women are at the table. And it's important to understand the particular and many scenarios in which religious women have uniquely contributed to resolving and preventing violent conflict. Because of their moral leadership and credibility at the community level, religious actors have played critical roles in bolstering and undermining trust in and therefore sustainability of peace accords. They can have vital roles to play in Track 1 processes, serving as mediators or advocates, for example. As USIP's research has shown, inclusion of religious actors in formal peace processes, including national dialogues, if done carefully, can result in more sustainable peace outcomes. Their exclusion can also be detrimental to a peace process, such as if the perspectives of their faith communities as constituents are not represented. In a high-level example, in the 1980s, Pope John Paul II mediated the Beagle Channel conflict between Chile and Argentina. In Guatemala, more locally, the Conference of Bishops of Guatemala urged the government to create a national reconciliation committee and provide direct assistance to victims of human rights violations. We know, too, that religious actors are often at the forefront of nonviolent people power movements at the grassroots, mobilizing civil society for social justice and human rights issues affecting their communities. According to global data sets, and Professor Durham, you and I spoke about it recently, and Brian, you were speaking about this just now, Latin America ranks among the highest regions in the world for religious freedom. This means that faith-based activities have significant room to contribute to peace building. Yet, religious peace building is complex and dynamic. Religious engagement is important, but it is important for religious actors and those who seek to engage them to understand how, when, and why their roles can be most effective in peace-building processes, and for all stakeholders to understand the risks that are entailed. As the Americas Summit meetings take place this week, those focused on issues of violence and peace, including efforts to address migration challenges, might take into account the tremendous potential and demonstrated actions of religious actors and institutions as part of ensuring this hemisphere can be a peaceful one. Thank you.
Thank you very much again for highlighting, among other things, the role of women Not only, there are other things you were covering, obviously, but just the importance, the data that shows that the distinctive role that women can play in these processes. And I want to add, I have a colleague who lives a few doors away who's done empirical studies of women in groups, in councils, and it's one thing to get women at the table and another thing to make sure they're fully engaged at the table, and finding the kinds of things that make women feel comfortable and empowered, and simple things like making sure that you strive to hear their voices and to work for consensus. Some of this empowerment takes extra steps. It's not just the first step of having the women there, but also having the really important roles that they play. But thank you very much. Now, we're low on time, but let me just follow up a little bit. I know Melissa and I have talked more about some of the tools that are available that might be used, and I know she has some, but some of the rest of you may have both some practical tools and then maybe just some practical insights from your experience of ways that religious groups, religious actors can be drawn into peacekeeping or peace-building kinds of processes. Let me give Melissa first and then Brian.
Thank you. Just to highlight that in some of our research and what we hear from partners on the ground, from religious actors themselves, is often a desire to be involved more, say, in Track 1 peace processes, in dialogues, in mediation efforts, and oftentimes there is an interest and a need for more capacity building in different ways, oftentimes recognizing, yes, that many of these skills are already employed, if not maybe formalized as such. But I wanted to note that USIP has many resources. We have a global campus, an online academy, and I'm flagging this for those of you who might be interested yourselves in learning some of the peace-building skills that USIP has a long history through our global campus in mediation, negotiation, reconciliation, and specifically on religion and peace-building with Search for Common Ground. Last year, we came out with an online course on religious engagement in peace-building that's intended for both religious actors who hope to engage in peace-building activities or advance their involvement therein, but also for those who seek to engage religious actors more carefully, more thoughtfully. We're also in process of developing a course right now with OHCHR and kind of in parallel with BYU colleagues on the Faith for Rights approach. And so there are many resources out there. I'll mention those. USIP has many toolkits as well for religious actors in peace building. And I'll just acknowledge that. And if anyone's interested, I'm happy to send links later. Thank you.
Let me just add one comment on that. I remember working in Bosnia in the 90s and hearing some really very excellent peacekeepers work. And I was talking to them about religious leaders and the role religious leaders play. And they pointed out that most religious leaders are trained in pastoral work. They probably get some experience in marital conflict resolution, but in typical peacekeeping, it's a different thing that people haven't really been prepared for. So the opportunities to have some of these trainings and upgrading people's skills for these areas is very important. Sorry, Brian.
So I'd like to challenge you to think of what you could do with $5,000. If you had $5,000, what could you do? So I'll give you one idea. A woman, Shireen Tabor, who runs Empower Women Media, came to me and she said, I know you're trying to get the word out for empowering people to have a voice on religious freedom and business. She said, I have a global network of women that I want to teach them how to do media, where they could have a 2 to 3 to 4 minute video showcasing how when you work together, it overcomes conflict and builds peace and reconciliation and religious freedom. And I said, great, I have $5,000. Let's give awards. And last year, the award winner was Wagma Feroz from Pakistan. And she produced a true film about a Pakistani hairdresser who was a Muslim who hired Christians and Sikhs and Hindus to work in her shop. And people came to our shop and said, well, we can't have a Hindu work on our hair, you know, and then by helping, no, these are people overcoming that. The film just showed once she did that, it was good for business, it was good for peace, good for religious freedom, and she got $3,500, which she's reinvested in her filmmaking, and now she's been interviewed across Pakistan, in the UAE, and they just had a large roundtable in Pakistan on religious freedom. There'll be another one next month where we're going to announce the new award winners. So it doesn't take a lot of money to do something, just an idea, you know, and people willing to do something, and you can spark the idea. So again, women's empowerment, it doesn't take a lot of money, but it just takes saying, well, I care about that. Let's do something.
I couldn't help thinking, if any of you have a spare $5,000, I know another place we could put it. But just let me open to any others on the panel who have sort of ideas of tools or training materials or things that they've found useful that might be helpful.
Use the example that you mentioned there with regards to a training or experience with marital counseling. I would somewhat disagree, but hopefully in an agreeable way, that actually, in fact, a lot of those skills developed during those times can and are actively used in all forms of conflict mediation around the world. The ability to facilitate the process, first of all, creating that safe space so that each person feels represented and can essentially say everything that they would like to say and feel listened to. But then, of course, a clear focus on outcomes immediately after. So there are, in fact, a lot of individual skills as well as organizational skills that can be leveraged to be able to build in what, in my case, I describe as positive peace. And it doesn't necessarily need to be large scale. Oftentimes, when we think about national issues, when we think about how we can improve elements related to government or a sound business environment, it does not need to be at a national level. Oftentimes, we don't have that ability. Oftentimes, we only have $5,000, and those are the good times. But what we can do is we can find ways of building positive peace incredibly locally as well. Those pillars that we looked at before are things that can be applied in any community, individually of any size. They can be applied within the church, within the congregation, inside a school, even inside a family as well. And lastly, in terms of additional tools, our ongoing partnership with the Religions for Peace and 3 major positive peace conferences that we'll be having this calendar year throughout the Americas. And lastly, just building on the tools offered by Melissa, we also have a Religions and Peace Academy, which is a free online training portal as well. So plenty of tools there that we hope to share with you more broadly.
So Melody, did you want to add?
Okay, any tools that
Yeah.
recommend?
Have said, and I agree with all of them. Yes, we do need money for many projects. And as many of you have said, and regarding of positive peace, and I took those trainings, Elias sent the email to me, and it was very interesting to do that. I believe that as a tool, we need communication so that more people are aware of these free tools on positive peace, conflict resolution. Today, there are so many, and they continue, and they've increased during the pandemic, where any person can be online from any part of the world. And the main tool that we need is education and training. I don't want to be redundant or repetitive, but to achieve a goal of equity and engagement between men, women, and youth, we need to understand their needs first, and we have to offer opportunities for training within communities. And then this will start operating in different communities about the equity that we need in this process for ongoing peace.
So we're out of time, but I'd like to give the final word to Father Cruz Serrano.
Yes, I think in this theme, the important is the person, the concrete person in every situation. A real man, a real woman that are suffering. Are different issues, and maybe is different from the Caribbean to the continent. So, but the important is the person. The reality is that the person is living there where they are. And all the structure that we have as church, the Catholic Church, and also the other organization, other people, the believers' people, is to put in the center the person. If we are moved in this direction, we have all the answers, because we want that the person grow and go away from all the difficulties. Are different levels. For example, at political levels, I remember the travel from Chile and Argentina with the channel of a Beagle. So it was in a level, high level, that a cardinal came for the dialogue from the two parts. But other situations that the people are suffering. For example, I am thinking now in the Amazonia. The people are suffering for the human rights. The indigenous people are suffering because their land, their language, everything are destroyed for these great companies. So we have also people of faith in that areas that are working with the indigenous people to help them, because they know the reality there. And are also persons, I remember this, the REPAM, that is the Red Ecclesial Panamazonica, that is built for this, that to hear the difficulties of people in that real moment and to apply for the possibility solution. I think my suggestion about this meeting of today, that is a very positive meeting, because it's to come together to put the person in the center of our life. If we are doing this, it's because we are walking for the same gaze of our Father, that is God, and every one of us, we are brothers and sisters, the same Father. So this is my commentary of this, and thank you very much.
We have a final request from our online colleague, Tony Kyriopoulos. We'll turn the time over to him for a final word as well.
Thank you. I appreciate it. I just wanted to add my voice to these other colleagues and stress how important it is to equip and engage our constituents meaningfully, to allow them to do the work, that it's not just us ourselves at the table, but nevertheless those who live it out on a daily basis, and those who seek to construct peace in their local communities. And they deserve our support. And I know we all do that, but nevertheless, we shouldn't forget that as we think about programming and efforts that we do together as religious communities. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for that reminder. You know, I think it's a really important thing. I've often heard, many of you would know Sharon Eubank, who's head of LDS Charities, and she's working globally on humanitarian aid, but when she talks to people about what to do, she says, find something local. And there's tremendous wisdom in that. But just remembering that to reach out as we go back to our colleagues, to our friends, to our families, that this is, well, remembering the person at every level is vital. So please join me in thanking the panel, and this will be the end of this session.